Millionaire mocked his black. Ex at his wedding. Her. Revenge left guests speechless. Welcome to Alcot Stories. Hey, beautiful souls. I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive into today's powerful love story, let me ask you, what would you do if the man who shattered your heart invited you to his wedding? Just to mock you, unaware you held the biggest surprise of his life? Stick around, because this one will leave you speechless. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching me from and what time is it there? I love seeing how far our Alcott family reaches across the world. And before we begin, may your heart be calm, your mind be clear, and your soul stay wrapped in love and protection. Whatever you're facing right now, I pray this story brings you warmth, hope, and maybe even a few healing tears. Let's begin, family. This is Alcott Stories, where emotions speak louder than words. The sun filtered through Zahara Bennett's studio window as she sketched the hem of a wedding gown that would never be hers. Unaware that the envelope sliding beneath her, Doctor would reopen the wounds she had sealed with quiet strength. It shimmered gold, too elegant to hold such venom, its wax seal pressed with the initials that once meant forever. C.H. Colton Hayes. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, her breath catching in her throat before she dared to break it open. The contents sliced through her chest like glass, an invitation to the wedding of the man who once called her his world, now marrying the heiress who mocked her existence. She stood still, the silence screaming louder than any siren, the air turning heavy with betrayal that never truly faded. Colton, her ex-husband, the tech mogul with blue eyes that once promised stars, now inviting her not to witness love, but to relive humiliation. His timing was deliberate, cruel, calculated. Zahara could almost hear the smirk behind the gesture, the smug assumption that she'd either cry at home or show up, shattered and defeated. The audacity clawed at her chest. This wasn't about closure, it was a message. Look what I have. Look what you lost. But he hadn't taken everything. Zahara was not the same woman he left behind, crushed and voiceless. Her name now carried weight in fashion circuits. Her designs graced the backs of women who refused to break. Still, the sting returned, vivid and brutal, memories of him storming out, his voice cold, accusing her of being a gold digger, not a partner. She had pleaded for him to listen, to trust her. But he'd slammed the door on both her and the life forming within her. Zahara clenched the invite so tightly the edges bit into her palm, tears brimming but refusing to fall. Her instinct screamed to shred it, to erase the insult with fire. But then her gaze shifted to the photograph. On her desk, two tiny girls with eyes, just like Colton's, laughing in matching pajamas. No one knew about them, not even him. They were her secret, her strength, her revenge wrapped in innocence. A different fire lit in her chest, not rage, not sorrow, but purpose. She wouldn't hide. She wouldn't weep in silence while he flaunted his betrayal in champagne and chandeliers. She would go, not to beg, not to cry, but to reclaim the dignity he tried to destroy. Her hands moved with grace as she slid the invitation into her drawer, smoothing her blouse as she stood. Her mind raced with decisions, what to wear, how to walk, how to look into the eyes of the man who abandoned her, and show him what resilience looks like. She would arrive not as a guest, but as a revelation. Her daughters deserved to see their mother unshaken. He needed to see the life he cast aside, now blooming without him. The wedding would no longer be his victory, it would be her reckoning, and Zahara Bennett never missed her mark. Zahara stared out of her studio's wide glass window, watching city lights flicker like broken promises, her reflection a silhouette caught between past ache and present strength. As memories surged in without mercy, triggered by that cursed invitation, 3 years ago, she'd been in love so deeply, it felt like the world tilted in favor of their every step. Colton and Zahara, the golden couple of ambition and adoration. She'd sketch wedding dresses late into the night, while he ran code and built empires from the glow of his laptop, their dreams braided into one future. He used to bring her midnight coffee with little hearts drawn in the foam, whispering that one day she'd wear the most beautiful gown she ever designed, her own. He called her his peace, his fire, his forever. But forever had an expiration date, and it came wrapped in silk lies and sharp gossip, whispered like poison in the ears of a man too proud to question and too privileged to see beyond his circle's venom. They said she was leveraging his name to rise faster in fashion, that she had a secret investor, a lover with deeper pockets than passion. Colton never confronted her, never looked her in the eye to ask the truth. One morning, he simply walked out, no fight, no farewell, just the echo of slammed doors and a love left gasping for air. Zahara had stood there frozen, clutching her sketchbook, unable to comprehend how everything they built could vanish without a trial, a conversation, or a shred of grace. The house they shared suddenly felt like a stranger's museum, and every room echoed with questions he never asked. That night, heartbroken and alone, she sat on the bathroom floor with a pregnancy test clutched in her trembling hands, the two pink lines mocking her with both miracle and tragedy. Her breath caught, not from fear but disbelief that life could be this cruel. She had lost her lover, her partner, and now carried his children in a world that had no room for her pain. There were no paparazzi headlines, no dramatic posts, no desperate calls. Zahara disappeared with quiet dignity, shielding her unborn daughters from the chaos of a broken fairy tale. She left the city, changed her number, and started over in the quiet town of Marigold Springs, where no one knew her past, only her talent. Every day was a struggle, a balance between mourning the love that shattered her and preparing for the lives she now had to raise alone. Her belly grew with the weight of twins and unanswered questions, but her resolve grew even faster. Zahara taught herself how to breathe through contractions alone, how to swaddle babies with shaky hands, how to smile when it hurt, and how to build a brand from ground zero while rocking 2 cribs in a studio that smelled like formula and fresh linen. She never once told the girls their father's name, not out of hate but out of mercy. She refused to let bitterness become their bedtime story. Yet some nights, when the girls were asleep and silence crept in like a thief, she'd curl up on the couch, holding an old photograph of Colton, not out of longing, but as a reminder of who she'd survived. He haunted her not in presence, but in the eyes of her daughters, their giggle, their stubbornness, their love for puzzles and gadgets. She knew his blood ran through them and it terrified her. But it also reminded her that love once existed, even if it ended with betrayal. The man who walked away never looked back, and for that, she gave him no second glance in return, until now. Until that wedding invitation unearthed the past like a ghost pounding on her door. But this time she wasn't the girl he left. She was the woman who rose. And as the flashbacks faded into the night, Zahara stood straighter, her heart heavy but no longer hollow. She had lived through abandonment, birthed beauty from pain, and turned silence into resilience. And now, as fate dared to reopen the wound, she was finally ready to show him what he lost, not just in love, but in legacy. The morning of the wedding dawned with the kind of sunlight that mocked broken hearts, too bright, too cheerful, too blind to the wreckage it illuminated. Zahara stood before a full-length mirror in her hotel suite, her hands steady as she adjusted the black velvet gown that hugged her figure like it was stitched by vengeance itself. The deep neckline framed her poise, not her skin, and her dark curls cascaded down her shoulders with regal defiance. Her daughters, Celine and Nova, tugged playfully at her hem, wearing matching ivory dresses with tiny bows Zahara had sewn herself, each thread a silent declaration of survival. The limo ride to the venue was quiet but electric, the kind of silence that didn't scream but simmered. Zahara's heart didn't pound. It pulsed like a drum of justice beneath her ribs. When the car stopped before the estate gates, her breath caught, not from nerves but from finality. She stepped out, heels clicking against stone, her daughters at either side, their tiny hands gripping hers like anchors of truth. The guards, unsure, hesitated, then let her through. Too stunned to question a woman who looked like royalty. Guests in couture paused mid-sip, conversations fading as Zahara glided past rows of white roses and golden arches, her presence louder than any vow recited that day. Her entrance didn't need music. It was the moment that stole the melody. The twins skipped beside her, innocent and glowing, their soft curls bouncing in rhythm with the gasps that followed them. Zahara didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just walked like the ground owed her grace and gravity. Then she saw him, Colton Hayes, standing at the altar, mouth parted, color draining from his face like champagne spilling from a broken flute. His tailored suit looked suddenly too tight, his shoulders tense beneath the weight of a past he thought he buried. Next to him, Vanessa Carrington, radiant in a white dress and high society arrogance, gripped his arm with knuckles pale as ash, her eyes darting between the twins and Zahara like a woman watching her empire crumble one step at a time. Colton's lips moved, forming her name like a ghost escaping his throat. But Zahara didn't falter. Her eyes met his, not with longing, not with pain, but with the calm fury of a woman who had found strength in silence. Guests turned, murmuring as recognition spread like wildfire. Old college friends, press elites, former colleagues, all trying to place the timeline, the scandal, the truth. Zahara reached the aisle's edge and paused, letting the full view soak into every guest's eyes, their mirrored features. The soft curve of Colton's jaw etched into the faces of her daughters. Not a word spoken, yet the revelation screamed. Vanessa's posture stiffened, her smile cracking at the edges as she realized this was no accident. It was retribution served on white linen and glittering crystal. A toddler's laugh echoed softly, Nova's, as if innocence had no idea it was detonating a secret. Colton took an involuntary step forward, eyes wide, blue as the skies they once watched in bed together, now storming with confusion, regret, and the sharp bite of a truth he never saw coming. Zahara scanned the sea of startled faces and saw exactly what she came for, not chaos, but clarity. She hadn't arrived to scream or confront or collapse. She had arrived to reclaim space. Space in the narrative, in the memory, in the legacy Colton thought he controlled. Every inch of her radiated composure, from the subtle shimmer in her lipstick to the way she gently ran her thumb along Celine's hand. The world kept spinning, but the wedding had stopped. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, holding its breath for what came next. Zahara didn't need to announce her daughters. She simply existed beside them, and the resemblance did the rest. A photographer's flash popped in the distance, and she turned her head just slightly, giving them her angle, not for vanity but for proof. Colton's expression morphed into something fractured, a man meeting the past he didn't know had roots. Zahara stood taller, not out of pride, but because survival had given her a backbone stronger than diamonds. This wasn't a plea for attention. It was a statement of arrival, a silent thunder that said, I was never erased. I was only waiting, and now I write the next scene. The reception glittered like a royal gala, strings of pearls, draped from the chandeliers like frozen tears. Violins humming a melody too, delicate for the tension, brewing beneath the surface, and golden lights flickering across, champagne flutes held by guests, who whispered more than they sipped. Zahara stood at the edge of the chaos she had just ignited, her breath steady, her presence unshaken, her daughters seated with grace on velvet cushions beside the fountain, unaware that the man watching them from across the hall had just had the ground pulled from beneath him. The music shifted, but the mood didn't. Eyes followed her as she stepped across the ballroom with the quiet power of a woman who no longer cared for permission. Her gown swept the marble like a curtain call, and each click of her heel echoed louder than any announcement. Vanessa's laughter halted mid-chime when Zahara reached them, standing mere feet from the altar where Colton had pledged forever to another just an hour ago. He looked at her like a man robbed of breath, of time, of comprehension, his lips parted but no sound escaping. Zahara tilted her head, calm and razor-sharp, and with a single finger raised, elegant, unshaking, commanding, she pierced the silence. You mocked the wrong woman. The sentence wasn't shouted, but it thundered through the ballroom like a gavel, cracking the silence of denial. The room gasped in collective shock, heads turning, phones slowly rising, unsure whether to record or pretend to look away. Vanessa's jaw tightened, her bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. mascara clinging to lashes that suddenly felt too heavy. Zahara gestured gracefully toward her daughters seated beneath the floral archway and said, "Meet Celine and Nova Hayes, your daughters, Colton." Her voice didn't tremble. Her pride didn't bend. She spoke like a woman who had carried pain for too long, and finally placed it down without apology. The name Hayes struck like a lightning bolt. Some guests dropped their glasses. Others whispered too loudly. Colton's world spun so fast, he didn't realize the champagne flute in. His hand had slipped and crashed onto the floor, scattering glass and silence. He stared at the children, at their eyes, his eyes, at the curls, at the dimpled chins, at the undeniable truth. Vanessa took a step back, her expression cracking into disbelief and fury, whispering his name like a question dipped in betrayal. Zahara didn't flinch. She had delivered the truth like a sword and didn't need to watch it pierce. She turned with elegance, walking away slowly, letting her silence be louder than a scream. But fate, always dramatic, tugged at her heel, literally. A sharp crack split the air as her stiletto snapped, her ankle buckling, her body lurching forward, until a familiar hand caught her waist. Colton. Instinct had propelled him forward. His arms, still wired with memory, wrapped around her before her body could meet the floor. For a second, the world fell away. Her face was inches from his chest, the scent of cedar and regret flooding her senses. Her hands pressed against the same chest that once held her heart. His breath hitched, his grip tender yet unsure, as if he wasn't saving her but holding on to the last thread of a reality that was slipping faster than he could grasp. Zahara looked up into his eyes, those same piercing blue eyes that once promised her the world, and then shattered it with silence. But this wasn't a reunion. It was a moment frozen between revelation and reckoning. She steadied herself, standing upright without thanking him, because grace did not require gratitude when survival had been earned alone. Colton whispered her name, barely audible, like a prayer forgotten too long. She stared at him, not with hate, but with the piercing calm of a woman who'd buried love beneath layers of betrayal and had no intention of digging it back up tonight. Around them, the party unraveled, guests unsure whether to dance, drink, or disappear. Zahara turned toward her daughters, who clapped their hands, unaware that they had just altered the course of their father's life with nothing more than their presence. She walked back to them without another word, her limp subtle but proud, her broken heel no match for the strength in her spine. Behind her, Colton remained frozen, surrounded by pearls, flowers, and shattered illusions. Vanessa stood stiffly by his side, her grip loosened, her place uncertain. And though the reception continued, everyone knew the celebration had ended. The bride was no longer the star. The groom was no longer the victor. The ex-wife in velvet had walked in, dropped a truth heavier than diamonds, and left the world breathless in her wake. The pearls still clung to the chandeliers, but the celebration was long over. Colton stood among the ruins of what was supposed to be the best day of his life, yet all he could see were the faces of two little girls, who mirrored everything he never knew he had. Vanessa had erupted later that night, her voice sharp enough to slice through glass as she demanded explanations he couldn't give. Her pride bruised, her rage volcanic. "You invited a ghost, and she came with your blood." She spat before walking out in stilettos that clacked like gunshots against marble, leaving her ring behind on a table that now meant nothing. By morning, the honeymoon was cancelled. The press was buzzing with scandal, and Colton found himself in a luxury penthouse that suddenly felt cold and cavernous. He didn't call Zahara. Not at first. He just sat with a photograph of the twins, pulled from an anonymous blog post that had already gone viral, and stared at the soft brown eyes staring back. A storm brewed inside him, not just of guilt, but of unraveling truths he could no longer ignore. When he finally walked into Zahara's boutique, the door chimed like it was announcing war. She stood behind the counter, poised in cream linen and silent fury, her eyes narrowing the second she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, arms crossed like armor, every inch of her radiating ice. He didn't speak right away. There were no words strong enough to bandage a wound he'd never seen bleeding. "I cancelled the wedding," he finally said, voice low, broken. Not for me, she replied coldly. You're 3 years too late. Her words cut, but he didn't flinch. He didn't beg, didn't fall to his knees, didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply left, defeated. But the next day he returned. Not for her, for them. He waited by the preschool gates, awkward in his designer coat, holding a stuffed bunny and unsure of how to say, "I'm your father," to girls who thought daddies lived in fairy tales. Zahara watched from a distance, arms folded, lips pressed, wondering if this was a performance or penance. He didn't speak to her. He knelt to tie Celine's shoelace. He waited until Nova finished her finger painting and clapped. He memorized which twin hated crust on sandwiches. He showed up at school, plays in the back row, clapping louder than anyone else. He learned how Celine snuggled her blanket to sleep and how Nova liked bedtime stories with silly voices. He didn't try to force love. He earned every inch of it. He showed up drenched in rain one day just to hand Zahara the umbrella their daughters had forgotten. He brought coloring books, not jewelry. Patience, not flowers. Time, not apologies. Zahara watched, torn between anger and awe, unsure whether this was redemption or guilt in a better suit. Her heart, once buried beneath betrayal, flickered with confusion. The man she remembered had been charming but careless, consumed by image and power. The man before her now stumbled through diaper bags and car seats with the desperation of someone chasing time already lost. She caught herself smiling one afternoon when Nova called him "Daddy" for the first time and watched as his eyes filled with tears. He didn't dare blink away. Zahara turned quickly, pretending not to notice, but her chest tightened in ways that terrified her. She didn't trust him, not yet, maybe never fully. But she couldn't deny the way the girls lit up when he walked into a room, or the softness in his voice when he asked about their favorite songs. She tried to stay cold, sharp, distant, but her walls had hairline cracks, and through them warmth began to seep in, slow, dangerous, uninvited. Every time he left, she swore it would be the last time she saw him. And every time he came back, he chipped away at something she thought had turned to stone. Zahara lay awake some nights staring at the ceiling, asking herself if it was possible to hate someone for what they did and still feel something. When they smile at your children, she didn't know. All she knew was that the man she once loved, the man who shattered her, was now kneeling beside their daughters in a sea of building blocks, whispering bedtime prayers like someone who'd missed many nights and was trying to earn just one more. The rain came fast, the kind that turns streets into rivers and skies into sorrow, thunder cracking like the echoes of old arguments. And Zahara stood at her window, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the storm unravel outside and feeling one build inside her chest. The girls were asleep, their tiny snores barely audible over the storm. But Zahara couldn't stop pacing, couldn't stop trembling, couldn't stop remembering the ache she'd buried too deep for too long. When the doorbell rang, she knew it was him, not because she expected him, but because grief has a way of summoning the only person it still hurts to see. Colton stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead, breath shallow, like he had run from every mistake just to reach her. She didn't speak, just stepped aside. He entered like a ghost, dripping rain onto hardwood floors, the silence between them louder than any thunder outside. Zahara turned her back, but her shoulders shook, and for once, she didn't try to hide it. "I begged you," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I begged you to believe in me." Her hands clenched at her sides, nails digging into skin. "I wasn't enough for you to question them. I wasn't enough for you to stay." Colton stepped forward, his throat thick, his face pale. "You were always enough. I was just too blind to see it." But Zahara wasn't ready for forgiveness, only truth. "I carried them alone. I screamed in a hospital room with no one holding my hand. I cut the cord myself. I built their world without you," she cried, her voice rising, cracking. "You left me when I needed you most. And I still don't know how to unlearn that pain." Colton collapsed onto the couch like the weight of those words was too heavy, tears stinging his eyes for the first time in years. "You didn't deserve any of it," he whispered, his voice raw. "It wasn't true, none of it. The lies, the betrayal. It was Vanessa. Zahara froze, her spine stiffening like steel. "What did you just say?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive, placing it on the coffee table between them like a confession. "Vanessa lied to me," he continued, voice trembling. "She created fake texts, edited photos, paid someone to play the part of your so-called secret investor. She did it because she wanted me, and she knew she'd never have me if I had you." Zahara stared at the drive like it might explode, her pulse pounding in her ears. Colton leaned forward, desperate. "I have recordings, emails, dates, everything. I didn't know until after I proposed. And I didn't want to believe it because if I did, it meant I destroyed us for nothing." The room tilted, and Zahara gripped the edge of the table to stay grounded. Everything she'd fought to forget was now dragging itself back into the room like a wounded animal. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, no longer strong, no longer proud, just broken and human. Colton dropped beside her, not saying anything, just reaching for her hand like a man who knew no words could fix what he'd undone. Zahara let him take it. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't pull away. The tears came slowly, then all at once. Waves of years she'd held in behind lipstick and posture. Colton cried too, silent and shattered. Forehead against hers, both of them trembling, both of them sinking into a grief only they could understand. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't a promise. It was pain, shared in silence, accepted without expectation. They stayed like that, curled on the floor while thunder rolled above them, rain painting the windows like the world was weeping with them. Zahara's breath hitched as she whispered, "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Colton nodded, not as a plea, but as an apology. "Then I'll wait," he said, "even if it takes forever." And in that moment, there were no rings, no riches, no headlines, just two broken souls holding each other beneath. A sky that couldn't decide whether to wash them clean or drown them entirely. But this time, Zahara wasn't alone in the storm. The morning after the storm, sunlight poured through Zahara's windows like quiet redemption. Soft and golden, not demanding but present, like a gentle invitation to breathe again. The floor still carried the ghost of their embrace. And though nothing had been resolved entirely, something unspoken had shifted. A few days passed, silent, tender, unsure, but then came the message that stirred the world. Colton Hayes was holding a surprise press conference. And it wasn't about mergers or money. Rumors exploded, cameras positioned, reporters gathered, social media erupted with theories. Zahara stood backstage at the event center, her fingers interlaced nervously, her daughters in matching pink dresses playing quietly by her side, unaware that history was moments from being rewritten. She hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't promised a future, hadn't signed her name to anything, but she came, curious, hesitant, and emotionally exhausted. The stage was bathed in soft light, the Hayes Industries logo gleaming behind Colton, but this time, he wasn't in a tailored suit announcing a billion-dollar deal. He was in a dark, open-collar shirt, no tie, his sleeves rolled up, vulnerability pressed into every line on his face. He stepped up to the mic, voice steady, but eyes scanning the crowd until they found her. "I've made a lot of announcements in my life," he began, "but none as important as this." The room fell still. 3 years ago, I lost the only woman who ever truly saw me. Because I didn't trust her. I believed lies. I walked away. And in doing so, I lost the chance to be a father, a husband, a better man. A murmur swept through the audience. He continued, "But life gave me another chance, not because I deserved it, but because she is stronger than anything I've ever known. Today, I want to introduce you to the woman who should have had the spotlight. All along, Zahara Bennett and our daughters. Selenia Nova." He motioned to the side of the stage, and the lights shifted gently. Zahara stepped into view, heart thudding, unsure if her legs would carry her all the way. Her daughters held her hands, their smiles wide and unaware of the gravity. Applause rose like a tidal wave, not polite but thunderous, shocked, stunned but deeply moved. Colton turned to face her completely, stepping away from the mic. He reached into his coat and pulled out not just a ring, but a thick envelope, documents. He knelt, not for spectacle, but in sincerity, holding them up to her. This isn't just a proposal. This is equity, he said. 50% of Hayes Industries in your name. Because your name should have never been erased. Because what I took from you can never be repaid. But what I build from this day forward, I want built beside you. The crowd gasped, reporters scrambling to capture every second. But Zahara saw none of it. She saw only the man on his knees, not begging but honoring. The man who mocked her at his wedding, now giving her not just his heart, but his legacy. Her lips parted, trembling, her throat burning with emotion she had fought too long to bury. She took a long breath, her eyes never leaving his, and slowly she reached out, taking the envelope with one hand, the velvet box with the other. She stood in silence, eyes wet but fierce, heart pounding. And then she spoke, not loud but with power. You mocked me once, betrayed me once, she said, each word cutting through the air like gospel. But this time, you stood beside me when no one else would. The crowd held its breath. Zahara slowly extended her hand, helping him rise, not as a gesture of surrender but of control. So I'll take your hand. But on my terms, she finished, her voice steady, her spine straight. He smiled, not with arrogance, but with deep, tearful relief. She didn't need a ring to be validated. She didn't need shares to prove her worth. But he gave them anyway, not as a gift, but as a recognition. Cameras flashed, applause exploded. But the only thing Zahara heard was her daughter's, laughter and the sound of her heart, choosing peace over bitterness. In that moment, under soft lights and wide eyes, they weren't just lovers reconciling, they were warriors finding each other again in a battlefield of trust. And as Colton kissed her hand, not her lips, just yet, the world watched in awe, as the woman once mocked became the woman gloriously chosen.